Good morning, everybody. It is Friday, July 10th, and we are on our weekly SCORE webinar series. Lovely weather today. We have to, it's a good day to be sitting inside and talking on a webinar and catching up on some loose ends. So my name's Claire. I am a SCORE mentor, and I also help facilitate some of the SCORE webinars and seminars that we run. I'm going to be helping today to facilitate this call. We are a non-profit entity. SCORE is a non-profit entity. We offer mentoring, webinar services, and seminar services to local small businesses. On the call today, I represent the Monmouth County chapter, but we are a national organization and we're supported by the SBA. Couple of quick housekeeping things. We have a Q&A function, so we're going to encourage Q&A throughout the presentation today, and we're going to try to answer all of your questions. So just keep feeding in your questions through the Q&A function. Don't use the chat function or the raise hands, because we don't monitor that as much as we monitor the Q&A, and I'd hate for any questions to get missed. Today we have Dr. Alison Block with us. She is going to be helping us understand and talking about how to manage emotions in business, especially in these trying times. I mean, practices we can probably apply throughout our entire business careers, but it's fairly apropos given to the world we're living in today. So I'm going to hand over to Dr. Block now. I'm going to I'm going to ask her to introduce herself a little bit and just talk about what she's going to be talking about today. So thanks, Dr. Block, and over to you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here, and Claire and I were talking about how lovely the weather was. So this is a wonderful thing to be doing on a rainy day. I am a psychologist. I work in Monmouth County. I have a private practice in Oceanport, New Jersey, but I'm also a small business owner. My private practice is a small business. I also do a lot of public speaking. And in addition to that, I'm a consultant. I work at our local teaching hospital, training medical professionals about how to deal with emotions in their patients and how to deal with emotions in themselves and how to manage those things. So you might be asking yourself, why do I need to talk to a psychologist about emotions in business? What does emotion have to do with business? So let me give you some examples of what happens when we don't manage our emotions well. Let's say that you've had a really tough time. Maybe your loan didn't come through, or you're having trouble with your biggest client, and you go to work and you're all irritable. And what happens is an employee of yours asks you a question and you snap at them. So you've now affected the relationship that you have between yourself and your employee. And if that employee talks to other employees, perhaps with the rest of the crew, or what if you've had a tough night and you're coming kind of sad and you kind of can't get yourself going and can't do what you need to do. You're not a good role model for the people who are around you. You may be ignoring something important for a client. Or think about it in the other direction. What if you've had a really tough day at work for any variety of reasons, and you go home and you take that out on your family, on a wife, on a husband, on children? They're your support system. They're an important part of you managing your emotions. And so you've kind of blown it there. So what we know is that emotions are important in relationships. They're important in business. They're important in achievement. They're important in so many, many things. When we're dealing with negative emotions, it's important first to identify the stressors. Before I get into those stressors, let me tell you a little bit about what I'm going to talk about today. I was just saying to Claire that I'm really talking about everything I do in my private practice. So we're going to try to pack a lot of things in. I hope that you will ask questions. We're going to talk about identifying your stressors. We're going to talk about managing your emotions in order to keep your motivation at an appropriate level. We're going to talk about managing your emotions in order to keep your productivity at an appropriate level. Then we're going to shift gears a little bit, and we're going to talk about how do you identify your feelings and your thoughts? How do you go about that? And then what are some of the techniques that you can use to manage emotions? And finally, at the end, I want to finish up with resilience. Resilience is the key to everything. Bouncing back when things don't feel good, bouncing back when something has gone wrong is one of the most important skills that we can have throughout life. And when I say bouncing back, I mean in business, in personal relationships, in internal feelings of achievement, and in everything that we do. So I'm going to start now just by talking briefly about identifying the stressors that are often the precursor to negative emotions. Obviously, dealing with emotions is important all the time. But in these times, these very difficult, unprecedented times of a COVID-19 pandemic, we have some stressors that we haven't always dealt with before. For example, scarcity of toilet paper early in the whole pandemic thing was a stressor for a lot of people, something most of us in this country have never dealt with before. But there are other stressors. There is loneliness, there is grief, there is financial stress, especially if your business is undergoing financial stress or if your family is undergoing financial stress. Sometimes there's even boredom if we've been isolated because we haven't been able to do our business in the normal way. For myself, I am working from home. I'm not seeing my colleagues, and I'm only seeing my clients on a screen. So there's sometimes a sense of isolation and not having the stimulation that we normally would have. So when you think about negative emotions, you want to take a little bit of a look backwards and say, what were some of the stressors that caused those negative emotions? Does anyone have a question about those stressors, about their negative emotions? No? Then I'm going to keep going.
I had you muted. Sorry, that was that was my fault. But there aren't any questions about that.
Okay.
But one quick thought was, so I think it's important to understand or to identify that the stresses that you might feel at work, right, they don't just come from work. They can also come from external factors, right?
Absolutely. You can bring stressors from your personal and family life into work, and you can have stressors that occur in work. Maybe things aren't going well with how you've set up your business. Maybe you're having a problem with a client. Maybe you don't feel you've been as effective as you want to be. But you can also take those work stressors outside of the work environment. So it's never just a one-way street.
Yeah, that's sometimes it's hard to identify. Sometimes you might be having a bad day. I know if I'm having a bad day at work, it might not be because of something that's happening at work, and it's sometimes easier or helps if I take a step back and say, wait, hang on a second, let me realize that I'm bringing in outside stresses into my day.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Sometimes it can be something as simple as having a poor night's sleep, right, and not really being on top of your game, really, right, more than anything else. So there are a lot of things that we want to do. One of them, and I'm not going to talk about the details of it now, I'm going to talk about it a little bit later, but I want to plant this seed. A lot of the negative emotions that occur in business are anxiety-based. Worry about what's going on in the business. Am I doing it right? Do I have enough customers in the pipeline, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the seeds I want to plant with you today is that it is possible to learn to be calm about anxiety. And we're going to talk about that later on when I talk to you about something called acceptance and commitment therapy. Okay, but just think about that. Plant that little seed. I can be calm about anxiety. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is managing your emotions in order to keep your motivation at an appropriate level. We all have changes in motivation. Some days you're just raring to go and you get a million things done. And other days you're not quite raring to go. You're struggling and pushing through. And during this time when many of us are isolated, you may be feeling even less motivated. A lot of us we rely upon, I guess I would say, external things for motivation. Somebody pats us on the back and says, good job. A new customer comes in the door, things like that. But when we are more isolated and we have less contact with our normal world, we also have to think about what's going on inside of me, what's really important to me. In order to stay motivated, though, we have to really focus, narrow our focus and say, what do I have to do today? Maybe it's a big thing, okay? I have a big project that I have due in a little bit over a week from today. How am I going to manage that? The most important thing would be to break it down into small, manageable tasks. Because when it looks like a great, big, overwhelming thing, our emotions can get in the way. The next thing is to not be too perfectionistic. And I'm going to talk about perfection in a couple of venues. When we are very perfectionistic, I don't have enough time to do the whole thing, so I'm not going to start it yet. Okay? We often not only don't do it, we don't do it well because we're worried too much about a bar that we have set too high. Thirdly, it helps to identify some small rewards. And by rewards, I do not mean ice cream every 15 minutes, because that can really get in the way in other fashions. But some small rewards. I'll give you an example from my own business. I love dealing with people. I hate writing reports. So if I have to write a report, I have to kind of tease myself along the way. If I get my outline done, I can take 15 minutes and read a book. If I get the first draft done, my reward might be to go for a walk, okay? So when you're dealing with tasks that you don't feel really motivated to do, find small rewards that can help push you along. And those are things that essentially come from within you. It's not from somebody else patting you on the back and saying, hey, good job. So we have to find this motivation within ourselves as a way to deal sometimes with negative emotions. Okay, so that's a way that managing emotion helps us maintain our motivation. And a thing that I would add, a last point I would add to that is also when you're trying to stay motivated, sometimes it helps to think about what you can do for others. Even in the confines of this pandemic with social distancing and masks and all of that, we know that people who stick to things are often a little bit more left-brained. They're a little more altruistic. So sometimes our motivation can be helped by helping others, making the time to help others, okay? So that's one of the things we can do in order to manage our emotions, to maintain our motivation. Try to keep it even. It doesn't work well when our motivation is here one day and not existent the next, and here the next day and non-existent the next. We want to try to keep our motivation at a pretty steady level. Yes, we're going to have bursts of creativity, but we want to keep it pretty steady. The next thing we want to do is we want to manage our emotions in order to keep our productivity up. How many of you out there, can they raise their hands for this on the little hand thing, Claire?
Yeah, they can. We can.
Okay.
Particular days if they, yeah, but yes, we can use
If you have little hand things on the bottom of your screen, how many of you suffer from procrastination some of the time or all the time?
I'll raise my hand.
Okay.
Yeah,
I certainly know that I do.
There's quite a few raised hands here.
Quite a few raised hands? Okay.
Quite a few raised hands.
All right. So one of the things that we know from research is that procrastination doesn't mean that you're not a good person. Procrastination does not mean that you have a bad work ethic. Procrastination does not mean that you weren't taught the right skills to do the job necessarily, although that can be a possibility for some people. What the research has shown is that when people procrastinate, here's another place where emotions are important. They are procrastinating because there are negative emotions about the task that they're supposed to be doing. And they're trying to avoid feeling those negative emotions. So think about a time that you have procrastinated, okay? When I write a report, I immediately go to, I hate this, I don't write good reports, and that makes me feel not very competent. How about you, Claire? What
Well,
happens when you procrastinate?
I procrastinate all the time. I start making lists just so I can cross things off the list and then make them again. Just that's my kind of form of procrastination. Although I do need my lists, they're very important. But sometimes they become that then my oh, let me just write everything down so I can then cross it all off and write it down again. But let me not actually do anything. But I was going to ask you about the reports that you hate writing. But do you, when you've actually done them, is there a sense of accomplishment then? And are you happy with what you've actually put out? It's more in your head that you don't like doing them?
It's definitely in my head. I always feel good when they're done. I'm a writer and a rewriter, so I try to make it as good as I can. But there's also the feeling of relief, because within any business, there are tasks that you love. And then there's certain tasks that you just have to do that may not be the reason you went into that business, okay? Maybe you're selling something and you love selling to your clients or your customers, but maybe you hate doing inventory, okay? Right. That kind of thing. So there's always, among the many, many tasks we have in our business, we could probably array them from the ones we like the most to the ones that we like the least. And so we really have to sometimes push ourselves to do those parts of our business that are not our favorite thing. And so that's an area where procrastination is very common, all right? So what you want to do in order not to procrastinate is, once again, avoid perfectionism. Perfectionism is really a hobgoblin. So many people say, oh, it has to be perfect. I can't do it until it's perfect. I can't hand it in until it's perfect. Or I can't do it until I have enough time to do the entire thing. That goes back to the maintaining your motivation, breaking it up into small tasks, doing what Claire does, making lists. Lists can be very helpful when you're trying not to procrastinate. You also have to stop worrying. Often we procrastinate because we are worried about what someone else will think. We have to stop worrying about what others will think of what we're doing or about how well it's going to come out. We've got to get it done. And sometimes the best way to get it done is to complete our first not very good product, because often that's enough of a sense of accomplishment to get us to keep going to make it a good product. But we've got to get it done, okay? And you also need to think about your personal style. I'm a morning person. I'll get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and get going, and 2 or 3 hours can go by and I will have accomplished a lot. I have a family member who's a night person who does not start working until 11 o'clock at night. So are you someone who works better at night? Are you someone who works better in the morning? When you're procrastinating about a task, think about your personal style. Think about the times you feel the most productive. And then from there, try to pick a time to do it when it is most likely that you will get it done. That can make a big difference in terms of what you're doing. And think about the fact that you don't fix procrastination once and it goes away. Procrastination is something we have to work on all the time, because there are always going to be these little negative emotions that we don't want to deal with. Okay? So that's something else that we want to do.
I have a question about procrastination. Do you think that's kind of a learned behavior that we've kind of taught ourselves over the years, or is that something that is just human nature?
I think procrastination can become embedded. I don't know that it's necessarily learned, but it can become embedded if we have not, as children, had anyone help us push through it, and if we have not learned the techniques to get around it. So we will often see people who just don't do what they have to do in their jobs. We often see people who go from job to job because they procrastinate and don't turn things in on time. That sort of thing. It's hard to be successful if you procrastinate on a regular basis. Everyone procrastinates now and then. I don't think it's a learned behavior. I think it is a reaction to negative emotions. And we all have negative emotions. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm talking about feelings, emotions, but where do these feelings come from? We're very emotion focused in our country. Every one of you could tell me how you feel about some difficult situation. What we're not focused on is what we're thinking. I am a cognitive behavioral therapist, and in cognitive behavioral therapy, one of the things we know is that the feelings come from the thoughts, not the other way around. So I'm going to give you an example that I hope will help you to understand that. Imagine that you have a business where you have clients, and one day you're walking down the street and you see a client coming toward you. And as he approaches you, he turns his head to the side and he passes by without saying hello. And you say to yourself, oh, that poor guy, he must have been really distracted. That's why he didn't say hello to me. And you feel okay about that. That's your first scenario. Your second scenario is you're walking down the street, a client is coming toward you. Client passes by without saying hello, and you say, I'll bet he doesn't like what I do for him. He didn't want to say hello to me. And you feel hurt and angry. Most people blame a situation for how they feel. So the person who feels hurt and angry is blaming it on the fact that the client ignored them on the street. But if you think about scenario 1 and scenario 2, the two situations were identical. What was different was how the person interpreted the situation. And if I teach you nothing else today, that's a really key point, because how we give meaning to the events in our world, how we interpret situations is through our thoughts, our cognitions. So if someone comes to my office and they say, I'm really angry, a client walked past me on the street, I want to know what they thought when that happened. And if you think about those two scenarios, the thoughts came before the feeling. But we're not used to paying attention to our thoughts. They fly through our head at warp speed, and we're much more tuned in to that little emotional database that we have in this tiny thing in our brain called the amygdala. Okay? So we really need to start paying better attention to what we think as well as how we feel. We can't change how we feel if we can't change how we think. So let me tell you about a way that I look at people and try to help them do that. I joke with my clients and I say to them, you can get better, B-E-T-A, better. I don't have a Brooklyn accent, but I can try to fake it. Okay? What does B-E-T-A stand for? It stands for body, emotion, thought, and action. So let's take our business owner who's upset that the client ignored him on the street and take a look at what's going on for him. How does he feel physically? Maybe he's upset enough that he has muscle tension in his shoulders. Okay? We know his emotions already. He's upset, he's hurt, he's potentially even angry. What did he think? He thought that the client didn't like him or didn't like his product. And what happened as a result? He took that negative feeling back to the office or back to the warehouse or even back to home, and perhaps stewed about it, perhaps was irritable and took it out on someone else, perhaps felt a loss of optimism about how to do a good job, but it needs to be dealt with. So in my business, we have ways of dealing with the B, the E, and the T. And our feeling is if we can do that, the actions take care of themselves. So is everybody clear about the B, the E, and the T? Any questions about that, Claire?
There's no questions about that, but I'm just going to go back to the stresses because there was a question about, I'm going to just bounce back if that's okay.
That's fine.
And maybe, and then if anybody has any questions about the B or E and T, please go ahead and post them. But so one of the stressor questions was from Val, and she's asked, some of the stresses are from your employees who may be being grouchy or aggressive. Do you have any guidelines how to manage something like that?
That's a really broad question. I think, number one, that it's excellent that you are aware of your employees' emotions. And I think having a way to communicate to those employees can be important, whether you're doing it yourself or whether you have, I know that we're mostly talking about small businesses, but if there is someone in the business who specializes in HR, having them do it. I think one of the guidelines from my perspective would be, I've never had a business with more than a few employees. So I've had a secretary and I've had people working for me. I think what I would do is I would say, I would go up to them at a quiet and private time and say, you don't seem to be yourself today. Is everything okay? A nice open-ended question, and give them an opportunity to talk. Okay? In reality, our emotions are only the boss's business if they're affecting work or if they're affecting the feeling in the work environment. So I would start by trying to ask if everything was okay.
Is it okay in an instance like that to kind of identify to the stressor, in this instance, the employee, right? That perhaps their energy, or however you want to word it in a tactful way, is impacting other people? Is that confrontational or is that helpful?
I think I would start with that very open-ended and see what the employee tells me. And I would hope that just by showing interest, it might improve. If it didn't improve and it was affecting other people or affecting productivity, then I might want to have a subsequent conversation and say, you know, you said the other day that everything was fine, but you're the role model for these people, and I've kind of noticed that other people seem to be picking up on your mood. I want to ask you again, you know, what's going on? That type of thing. I think I'd be very gentle about that initially.
Right.
Okay, because the last thing you want to do is back someone against a wall and try to get them to talk when they're not ready to talk. You can't mandate talking.
Right.
You can only ultimately, yes, if it's affecting productivity, you can say, I know you said nothing is wrong, but I've noticed your productivity is down. That you certainly could say.
Because it's factual then, it's not, then you're dealing with facts, right? Productivity is down.
It's factual and it's part of the business.
Right. Okay.
Okay. And you also want to consider in that kind of situation, is this someone who's had problems before? Is this someone who's normally an excellent employee? And temper what you do according to that situation.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
All right. So we talked about you can get better. So you can look at yourself the same way I looked at that man who got snubbed on the street, or you can look at anyone else, but particularly look at yourself and say, how do I feel physically? Does my back hurt? Do I have a tension headache? Do I feel uncomfortable? What's going on for me emotionally? Try to name those emotions. Part of managing and moderating our emotions is developing a good emotional vocabulary. For example, let's use the word anxiety. There's worry, there's fearfulness, there's nervousness, there's just I'm a little uncomfortable. There are many, many words. If we only use anxiety all the time, we're not doing ourselves justice. So we want to develop a good emotional vocabulary and really be able to identify how we're feeling. Then comes the tough part. The really tough part is trying to figure out, what are we thinking? What is it that's causing this feeling? I'll give you an example for myself. I do a lot of public speaking. I always have a little bit of nervousness before I speak. But today I found myself with a whole new subject for my nervousness. Okay? And the thought in my head was, what am I going to do if it's thundering and lightning and I lose my Wi-Fi? Or the screen freezes? So you have to try to dig underneath the feeling to figure out what you're thinking. And then, what's the action as a result of that? Am I pacing the floor because I'm nervous? Or once I've identified what it is, have I said to myself, I can't control that. Just try to sit down and relax, that type of thing. So being able to go through the B, the E, the T, and the A is a way of assessing yourself and trying to figure out what's going on for you. So let's talk about some of the techniques that can be useful and help you to try to manage your emotions and change things for you. I'm only going to talk briefly about a couple of them, and then I'll talk more about some others. So when we think about body stuff, and believe me, emotions affect our bodies. I can't tell you how many people tell me their backs hurt and their shoulders ache and this aches and that aches. We do a tremendous amount of relaxation work, trying to get people to feel centered and to relax, and teach them different ways of breathing that can help reduce the effect of anxiety on their body. And we can also use things such as visualizations, scenes that you can create that make you feel good, that help you to get away from your stress or get away from the negative emotion and take you to a quieter place, a happier place, until you feel relaxed enough that you can go back and address an issue. So that's one of the things we can do for the body part of you can get better. The other thing we can do, and this really affects both feelings and thoughts, is mindfulness. I am sure you have all heard the term mindfulness in the last few years until you're absolutely sick of it. Okay, what is it? Why do I have to keep hearing about it? And what good does it do me anyway? Well, interestingly enough, mindfulness can play a really big role in how we deal with emotions. And mindfulness is nothing more than a non-judgmental awareness of what's going on for us, what's in our environment, what we're thinking, what we're feeling, what we feel physically, what we smell, what we taste, what we hear. All of those things become part of mindfulness. Early mindfulness research was done many, many, many years ago by a man named John Kabat-Zinn at Harvard. He was really the pioneer in mindfulness and had incredible success in areas like pain management with mindfulness. Today, mindfulness is used in almost every area of psychology, of business. It's even used with children in school, trying to teach children to be more mindful. So with mindfulness, we develop an awareness of our thoughts and our feelings, but without judging them, without saying, oh, that's a horrible feeling or that's a horrible thought, just becoming aware of it. So that's all I'm going to say about those two, because by themselves, they are enormous, enormous subjects. I just took a 30-hour course on mindfulness, and there are books and books and books written on it. But I do want to talk about two techniques that you can use. Both of them are part of cognitive behavioral therapy. The first is something called cognitive restructuring, changing the way you think so that you can change the way you feel. Let's go back to our business owner who had the client walk past on the street and see if we can do something to change the way he thinks. So what we would do, I was looking at your door swing open, Claire.
My doorbell rang and my dogs went flying out the room, and I'm so glad I had you on mute.
So anyway, what can we do to help this business owner not feel bad about the fact that the client didn't say hello? One of the things that we can do is we can examine the evidence. I can say to that business owner, well, let me ask you a question about that client. Has that client always been a little bit snobby or standoffish? No. Has that client ever not said hello to you before? No. Have you done anything that you can remember or think of to offend that client? No. So having heard those three no's, I might then say, you know, is it possible that the client was just distracted? Or maybe the client, him or herself, was just having a bad day? And if the answer is yes, then we know that your thought that the client doesn't like you and doesn't like your product or your services is not accurate. It's not constructive. So what we try to do then is we try to rewrite that thought. And we might say, even though my initial thought was that the client didn't like me or didn't like what I was doing for him, I've examined the evidence and I don't think it's likely that that's what's going on. And that's one of the ways we can get rid of the bad feelings. We examine the evidence on the one hand, and then we try to rewrite the thought on the other. And the name for that is cognitive restructuring. It's a really key part of cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectical behavior therapy, which is also under the umbrella of cognitive behavioral therapy. Now, for some people, dealing with anxiety, dealing with negative emotions, and trying to rewrite those thoughts feels like an insurmountable task. And there is a school of therapy that has arisen called acceptance and commitment therapy. And for some people, you heard me refer earlier to the fact that you can stay calm about anxiety. Well, this is where acceptance and commitment therapy is very valuable. You can say to yourself, this is how I feel. You can acknowledge that you don't like how you feel, but you can accept that there are negative feelings. You have to deal with them, and that you don't have to work to change it. You just have to accept it. Now, in order to accept it, you have to at least name what it is and kind of put it in a category. So for our business owner, it was a feeling of not being liked, not being valued. We might put that in a category of rejection, okay? Maybe that's the feeling that the person was struggling with. And you accept the anxiety instead of trying to get rid of it. Now you might ask, well, what good is that? If I can't get rid of it, how do I go forward? In acceptance and commitment therapy, we talk about living with the anxiety, but still pursuing your valued life goals. So for this business owner, a valued life goal might be having clients. And so in spite of your anxiety, you might decide to reach out and contact that client, just a casual call. You might not even refer to what happened on the street, but just try to confirm that that client is happy with your services and everything's okay. And is there anything else you can do for that client? So that's a place where accepting a negative emotion can still happen and you can still go forward, but you must identify it. So if I'm going to live with that negative feeling, what is my valued life goal that I'm still going to go forward with? My valued life goal in this case is having a full pipeline of clients for my business. And I still have to take action to pursue that. Okay. So I've given you some techniques. I've talked about maintaining motivation and maintaining productivity. And I'd like to finish today with resilience. Resilience is one of my all-time favorite subjects. In fact, I will tell you all that 1,000,000 years ago when I wrote my doctoral dissertation, I did it on something called hardiness. Resilience used to be called hardiness, okay? And I'll explain to you what the key elements of resilience are. Does everyone know what resilience is? We typically say resilience is bouncing back, okay? Bouncing back from what? Bouncing back from failure, bouncing back from a negative experience. In our case today, we're talking about bouncing back from a negative emotion. Nelson Mandela has a wonderful quote that I'll share with you. There are two quotes about resilience that I like very much. Nelson Mandela said, "Don't judge me by my success. Judge me by how many times I fell and then got up." Okay, the idea that you can fail, you can fall, you can not do a good job, and then you're still able to get up, make it better, start over, fix it, whatever it is that you need to do. So resilience is based on, there are about 5 things that are important for resilience. And these are not specific techniques, they're sort of concepts. One of them is connection. People who are more resilient are often more connected. We know that having a good social support system helps people to be more resilient. The next is communication. People who are resilient are able to talk about what's going on for them, identify it, and also reframe it if necessary. The third C is confidence. Confidence doesn't mean unbridled ego, okay, that you think you're wonderful at everything all the time and you're the best there is. What we mean by confidence is having a realistic assessment of yourself and your skills and what you can do. The fourth is what I would call commitment. Commitment means you're going to stick with it. You've got grit. Even if you fall down, you're going to get up. And no matter how hard it feels, you're going to keep working through it, whether it's hard to work through the emotion or hard to do the task you're trying to do or hard to get started in a new business, you're going to have stick-to-itiveness. And the last one is control. And control is the one that really applies to where we are today. Control means having control of your emotions so that you can go forward and succeed. So those are the 5 qualities that we find when we look at really very resilient people. Now, there are a million things that you can do to try to become more resilient. And you'll see I'll refer to my notes because I cannot remember all of them. First of all, you need to have a growth mindset. You need to believe that you can grow and change and become more resilient. And you can. Resilience is not just about personality. There certainly are people who are, I would say, through their personalities, more resilient, more laid back. But anyone can learn to be more resilient. So having a growth mindset, believing that you can do this is important. And there are many, many approaches. So let me just read them to you and then we'll wrap up. Okay. First of all, listen to the voice in your head and figure out if that voice in your head is realistic or if it's not doing you good, if it's doing you harm, then you've got to make a change. Share your catalog of fears. Share it with a good friend, share them with a therapist, share them with a family member. Don't keep them all inside. That's part of that communication that you need to be resilient. Try not to catastrophize. Don't think of everything as black and white. I either succeeded or I failed. Okay? Because if you catastrophize, if you're always black and white, it's either good or it's bad, it's right or it's wrong, I succeeded or I failed, you're always going to be out here on the extremes. There's a lot of gray in the world. Maybe I succeed most days, but today I didn't. That type of thing. Try to get into something that will help you practice self-regulation, whether it's yoga, whether it's Tai Chi, whether it's meditation, whether it's mindfulness. All of those techniques help you to self-regulate and manage your emotions better. Also, try to think about doing things that will build positive emotion and energize you. Exercise can be a very important aspect of that. Confront your fears. Don't avoid them. Tuck them away in your pocket, you don't solve the problem. Try to act quickly. When you don't act quickly, when you're not feeling great about something, and I'm not saying act, turn on a dime and act without thinking, but if you're going to feel lousy for 5 days instead of 5 hours, that's going to create a lot of emotional uproar. And emotional uproar is not going to help you in your business. Try to overcome anger. Even if you feel that your anger is justified, anger is an emotion that chews up your energy. And it's not usually welcome in business. Not a good thing to have. Any questions so far about these techniques?
There is a question, which is, there's an old adage, sort of, can you fake it till you make it? With resilience, would that be the case? You can kind of, even if you're not really feeling invested in those steps, can you kind of fake it until you break through and make it?
I think that, first of all, I think that's a wonderful phrase. That phrase derives from AA. And I think it's
Right.
a wonderful phrase. I think we can always fake it till we make it, as long as we're working on making it. Okay. Resilience cannot be a series of quick fixes where we fake it today and fake it tomorrow and fake it the next day and fake it the next day. You can fake it till you make it, as long as you are taking the time to work on becoming more resilient. So my answer is yes, you can fake it till you make it, with a little caveat there.
As long as you put the, I guess, yeah, as long as you put the effort in.
Yes,
Yeah.
you have to put the effort in, okay? And I want to just give you one other quote. It's a quote from Elizabeth Edwards. And the quote is this: "She stood in the storm, and when the wind did not blow her way, she adjusted her sails." So what that means is things aren't always going to go your way. We have to adjust. We have to adjust our emotions, our goals, our plans, our thoughts. But resilience is the ability to adjust our sails when we need to. And we make a lot of mini and micro adjustments all day long. But sometimes we have to make big adjustments, like COVID-19 has forced so many of us to make big adjustments, okay? So let me wrap up with this final thing. Let me tell you what the biggest problem is as I see it, okay? It's not in any book. This is my personal thing. I think number one, people think negative emotions are intolerable, okay? They can't stand them. They think they're interminable. They're going to go on forever. And they think they're dangerous and they're never going to change. And we know that that's not true. We know that we can manage them, we can deal with them, we can change them, we can utilize them. Even negative emotions, such as anxiety, can be energizing and help us to do things. So here are my words for you all. Do what you have to do in spite of your negative emotions. Try to get yourself to do that. That's that taking action, okay, that commitment, okay? Learn through whatever techniques, some that I've said today, some that you've learned on your own, learn to defuse your problematic thoughts and feelings, okay? Practice some kind of mindfulness. Be aware of what's going on for you. You can't fix it if you're not aware of it. And finally, practice self-compassion, okay? Cut yourself a break. We're not perfect. We're not going to get it right all the time. But if we can be compassionate toward others, we should also learn to be compassionate toward ourselves. And that's how I would end for you today.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
You know, it's interesting when you talk about mindfulness. I think one of the things you have to be conscious of is it's not a weakness, right? If you're worried about something, or you're feeling anxious about something, or if you have a reaction to something, it doesn't mean it's a weakness, and it's not something to kind of to bury away. But you know, when you were saying earlier about talk to people about it, or think it through, or practice, you know, practice mindfulness and kind of figure out what's causing it. But it's okay. We're all human, right? So
we're all human. And what I would say to that, Claire, and I think this is so important for people to remember, when people walk into my office with all sorts of problems, I don't think they're weak. I think they're courageous.
Right.
Okay, they want to work on things. So when we recognize our own negative emotions, and when we try to change them and make them work better for us in our businesses, we're being courageous. We're not being weak.
Yeah. And I think it's such an important thing to recognize, because people do think, oh my God, I'm reacting to this. I feel so overwhelmed. And that's such a, you know, I shouldn't feel that way. It's a, you know, I don't want to tell anyone I feel that way, or I don't want to ask for help. And it's.
Can I address that for one moment before we, for a lot of people, talking about their problems is very different. Talking things out is different. And there is real value in talking. When we're feeling a negative emotion, that little piece of the brain that I was talking about, especially if that emotion is anxiety, the amygdala, it looks like a little lima bean up here in our brain. That amygdala is the seat of our fight or flight center when we have these negative emotions. And when we're not talking about things, the amygdala is running the show. okay? When we start to talk things out, okay, then the newer portions of our brain, the executive functioning portions of our brain, get into the act, and we start to be calmer. We start to problem solve. We start to plan and organize. We learn to transition from one situation to another, and we are able to manage our emotions. So there's real value in talking about things. And I think from a business perspective, SCORE really fills that purpose.
I was just going to say, you've given me a perfect segue for that.
Well, SCORE are the people you talk to when you have a business problem. And when it's an emotional problem, people come and talk to me.
Right.
Okay. So I think there's real value in talking about things.
Yeah, I agreed. I agree. And it takes, sorry, someone just walked to my front door. We have one question from Anita. I'm naturally an introvert, and it's very hard for me to talk, especially when I feel overwhelmed or anxious. Any advice for people like me?
Well, first of all, don't feel bad about being an introvert. Okay, the world relies upon introverts for their incredible value in observing and analyzing things. And there's nothing wrong with being an introvert. In fact, if you're interested in a great book, there's a book by Susan Cain called Quiet. Okay, that's the name of it, Quiet. I can't remember the subtitle. It's something like The Importance of Introverts in a World That Never Stops Talking. Okay, something like that, but it's by Susan Cain. Yes, I think if you can't talk about your problems, you have a couple of choices. First of all, you can write about them, jot them down, try to see what's going on. Try to see as you write down these emotions, do they all fall into one category? Are they all about fear of failure? Are they all about having trouble communicating? You know, what are they about? And sometimes even as an introvert, you can find a trusted person, a friend, a family member, a therapist, someone whom you feel comfortable talking to. And that can be very helpful. But I would say if you can't talk about it, try to write it down. Try to express it in a certain way. I even had a client once who wasn't even able to write about his feelings. He used to paint his feelings. He used art to express his feelings.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I had one other question, which was, are you comfortable sharing your email address?
Oh, of course. I'll give you my website. Okay, it's www.Dr. Alison, Alison Block, Block. So it's dralisonblock.com. And you can contact me. There's a contact page on my website, and you can certainly contact me through there.
Okay, I just for anybody else who's interested in that, I put that in the Q&A. So anybody else needs that information, just send a quick chat if you don't see it. And then I have one other question. I think this might be a longer question, and we only have 5 minutes left. So I'll pose it just in case you have an answer, for, which is, I'm diabetic, and I know when I'm stressed, I eat more, and I know I'm doing wrong. Any tips on that?
I think that's a case where the BETA is very valuable, knowing what's going on for your body, okay, and recognizing the stressors, but also being mindful, in your case, being mindful of the ebbs and flows during the day of your appetite. You probably also have to keep your blood sugar. You don't want your blood sugar to go too low. So learning, how do I feel? When you might even try to check it. Am I always irritable when my blood sugar is dropping? And then be prepared with healthy snacks that can pick that blood sugar up. It is kind of a big question. That would be my sort of quick answer, but
Yep.
we could certainly talk about that.
Okay, I think we are at 11:56, so I think it's a good point to close. Thank you, Dr. Block, so much for your time. It was really informative and really valuable, and I'm so glad that you were able to join us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for inviting me. And I hope that each of you will take at least one little thing away from this that you'll be able to use going forward.
And I know I made myself a ton of notes, so I'm sure that there's been a lot of valuable information for people out there. On that note, thank you everybody for joining us again. We appreciate it. Please join us next week for our 11 a.m. webinar, which is some tips and tools of how to work with conflict in the workplace. And it's actually one of our SCORE mentors who is hosting that or presenting that webinar next week. So registration, as always, is on our website and on our Facebook page. The webinar will be on YouTube when we finish this webinar, so feel free, you can come back and revisit this webinar. You can also see it on our Facebook page. We were live on Facebook. I think just a reminder as well, if you're looking for a mentor, just kind of in line with what Dr. Block said, you know, talking things through from a business perspective is always very helpful. There is never a bad question when we're talking about business questions, or any question for that matter, but just from a SCORE mentoring perspective. So on our website, monmouth.score.org, take a look. All the mentors are listed on there. If you have any questions or you need any help with your business, or you just need to talk to someone about it, feel free to reach out and select a mentor. If there isn't a mentor there that you think will be appropriate for you, just reach out anyway, because we have a big network of people and we can always bring in the mentors that we think will be best suited to help you. On that note, I think I don't have anything else to add. So thank you everyone so much for joining again. Dr. Block, again, thank you very much. And we will be talking to you soon.
Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.
Bye.